Folks, the condo market across the US is beginning to crash. The inventory is spiking. Condo owners are trying to sell their units and there's no buyers. And now the condo values are officially going down according to data from Zillow. The condo market, it's a leading indicator. And some of the cities where condo values have gone down the most, everyone, are big ones. Oakland, Austin, St. Petersburg. In those markets, condo values are down over 20%. And in the city I'm standing in right now, condo prices have also started to drop by a lot in certain properties. And the overall issue with condos, everyone, is the HOA fees. The HOA fees have gone up so much over the last 5 years that it makes owning a condo no longer affordable in many markets. You look at the HOA fees on some of these properties, especially down in Florida, and they can be as high as $1,500 to $2,000 a month just for your HOA. Factor in your insurance, taxes, and mortgage interest, you could be paying $5,000, $6,000 a month to own one of these condos. But could this eventually be a buying opportunity, everyone? Could the condo values drop so much that it might actually make sense to start buying up condos at some point later in 2025 into 2026? I'm gonna talk about that later in this video and let you know when I think we're gonna cross that threshold. But first, I wanna address a big elephant in the room. And that's all the new construction that we have seen in a lot of different cities across the US housing market, particularly here in the Sun Belt in the South. There's been tons of new buildings built over the last 4 or 5 years. And this new inventory often is sitting vacant. Some of it's apartments, some of it's condos, some of it's offices. But one thing is becoming clear. The vacancy rates are going up. A lot more of these units are now sitting empty. And when you see higher vacancy rates, that's the telltale sign of a downturn taking place. That's the telltale sign that there was a bust now occurring in response to the boom that happened during the pandemic. And one principal issue for condos actually is the apartment market. And I want you all to understand this point, is that not only do condos compete with other condos, they also compete with apartments. And so here where I am in Nashville, everyone, you have condo buildings like the one in front of me where one bedrooms go for like 450 grand. And then you have apartment buildings where one bedrooms can rent for 1,600 a month. And if you were to buy a condo for 450 grand, your payment's gonna be around 3,500 in some of these buildings, 3,000 maybe. That's about a 40% discount, 40 to 50% discount to rent a luxury apartment versus buy a luxury condo. And that more affordable rental rate is causing like a nightmare for condo owners who are trying to like be investors. Like say someone bought a condo 3 or 4 years ago and they're thinking, oh, I'm just gonna rent it out. Well, you're now competing against all these new luxury apartments that were built over the last 3 years. Apartment developers in America, they built and permitted over 1 million units in 2023, 2024. They had over 1 million units under construction in 2023. They still have a lot of units under construction. A lot of buildings are now still being completed and finished. And what some of these landlords are now doing to lower the cost of moving in and to get more renters into the buildings is they're giving concessions. And what a concession is free rent. And often you'll see sometimes 1 month free rent, 2 months free rent. Here in Nashville, some of these apartment buildings are now even offering 3 months free rent. And you can see from this vantage point just how many units they've been building in Nashville. There's just so many apartments left and right. I'm in a neighborhood called The Gulch, which is near downtown Nashville. And this was basically like every apartment developer over the last 10 years wanted to get into The Gulch. And now we have this big overhang of supply. I was reading an article from The Real Deal, and they mentioned that in Nashville's downtown area, there's 4,300 vacant luxury apartments. 4,300 vacant luxury apartments. That is crazy. And I think the principal issue is, yes, they built a lot in a short period of time, but also the rents, the face value rents on these apartments. I just want to explain this all to you, how much it costs to rent some of these apartments in an area that's supposed to be affordable, Nashville, Tennessee. The rents here start around $2,000 for a 1-bedroom in these newer apartment complexes. And some of the older ones over there, it's around $1,500. Here it's $2,000. For a 2-bedroom, it's over $3,000. And some of these rents go all the way up to $4 grand a month. That building over there, that building is offering 3 months free rent. To get some of the more expensive 2-bedrooms, you could be paying as much as $5 grand in that building over there. And those are price points that are just out of reach for normal renters, especially renters in Tennessee. You know, when you go back about 10 years ago, data on ReVenture app is showing that the average rent in downtown Nashville was $1,000 a month. Now it's $2,300 a month. And the overall rent to income ratio in Nashville is 25.9%, which is around the middle of the pack, when again, Nashville should be affordable. Should be a more affordable option. It's become expensive, and we're seeing the results with this big overhang of empty apartment units. And one has to wonder, are the developers just going to cause a big crash here in Nashville with how much they built? But one thing I want you guys to remember is that these apartment owners, right, and developers, they're competing against the condos. They're competing against the condos for residents. And while the apartment rents are expensive, they're not as expensive as the cost to buy a condo. And the result is this, everyone. There's now 6.6 months of condo inventory on the US housing market, according to the National Association of Realtors. 6.6 months means it would take 6.5 months to sell all the condo inventory at the current sales pace. And the current sales pace for condos is actually the lowest we've ever seen. Condo demand is down at 20 or 30-year lows. So that's explaining what's going on in the market. Now, what's scary about that is that the last time condo inventory was this high at 6.6 months was 2011, at the end of the last housing crash. So we legitimately have now a similar amount of inventory to the end of the last housing crash in terms of condos, which suggests we're going to continue to see condo prices go down. Additionally, there's some other issues for condos that I got to talk to you guys about. One is the Fannie Mae blacklist. That's right, everyone. There's a secret list that Fannie Mae has where Fannie Mae won't provide mortgages on this list of condos. And no one fully knows how many properties are fully on this list, but people became aware of it about 2 or 3 years ago. After the Surfside building collapse in Florida, Fannie Mae got much more stringent on their underwriting standards for condos. They're now requiring regular inspections, that the reserves are in order, and as a result, a lot of condo properties now no longer are financeable with Fannie Mae mortgages, which is another reason that explains the low demand. And many of these condo properties in Florida are still struggling to fill their reserves. Governor DeSantis and the Florida legislature just gave condos another year in Florida to backfill their reserves. Seems like it might just be kicking the can down the road. A lot of these reserves are still underfunded, meaning there could be even more special assessments coming, even higher HOA fees for condo owners in Florida in particular. But I'm curious, would you guys actually buy a condo? Because a condo is kind of an interesting housing market instrument. It's an interesting asset. It's something where you don't really get your own space, right? You don't own land, you don't really have a plot of land. You're basically in an apartment, but you own the apartment. I think for a lot of people out there, that's a setup that they don't really feel comfortable with, because one of the best positives to buying real estate is buying a single family house where you have a yard, where you have some space between you and your neighbors. And when you buy a condo, you don't really get that. And some other markets, everyone, where condo prices are really starting to drop include San Francisco, Boise, Idaho, Jacksonville, Florida, Detroit, Michigan, and Denver, Colorado. You can see in all these markets, we have over a double-digit decline in condo prices from peak. Of course, most of them are still above where they were before the pandemic, but in some cases, like in Oakland, I mean, the condo prices are just really plummeting. In Austin, they're almost back to their pre-pandemic peak. In St. Petersburg, they're really going down. Even in a market like Atlanta, everyone, I was just in Atlanta, and in the downtown, midtown area, you have one-bedroom condos on the market for 250 grand. They're on the market for like 400 grand 3 years ago. So we are seeing real improvements in prices for condos. But if you're gonna buy one, it all depends on your budget. And I actually polled you guys and I asked you a question. I asked you the question, how much would you pay for rent in a nice new downtown apartment building? Like, what would be worthwhile to pay for rent? And I asked you the question, $1,500 a month, $2,000 a month, $2,500 a month, or I asked, maybe you just never would wanna live in a downtown area. And most of you said either you would never wanna live in a downtown area, or you'd only pay $1,500 a month to live in a nice new apartment building or a condo building as well, I presume. And so that explains the issue, right? Is like the relative value that a lot of Americans are prescribing on living in these urban, high density areas with a lot of apartments and condos. Yeah, it's $1,500 a month, maybe $2,000 a month. People would be willing to pay. And these condos and apartments cost way more than that. And that's why you're seeing all the concessions from the rental developers. That's why you're seeing the condo prices plummet in a lot of different Sunbelt housing markets. Now, folks, we're now approaching Broadway in Nashville. And if you've never been to Nashville, you gotta understand Broadway is like the center of the city. This is where they basically have bars open at 9 a.m. You can see they have the hockey arena over here. They have what's called the Batman building over there, because it kind of looks like Batman. And then you have one of the longest stretches of bars in the US. Some of these bars, like I said, open at 9 a.m. Some of them might even go 24/7, I'm not even sure. Now you guys can let me know if you like bars. I actually don't like bars. I don't even drink alcohol. I haven't had alcohol in almost 2 years. And when I lived in Nashville, I came to Broadway maybe like 4 or 5 times. Only really when like friends were in town just to show them. But Nashville is actually a great town, everyone. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed my time living here. I'm actually considering getting another apartment here in Nashville and opening a second headquarters for ReVenture app, keeping one in Florida, having another one in Nashville. Something I'm strongly considering right now. I haven't made a final decision on it. You guys can let me know what you think there. There's something I like about the idea of being able to be mobile and go back and forth between these cities. Also hit up Atlanta, also hit up Charlotte and all these other areas in the Southeast. I think once Nashville makes its way through this oversupply of apartments, this oversupply of condos on the market, I think eventually it'll be a good place to buy. But we're not at that point yet. There's over 10,000 homes for sale on the Nashville housing market across the whole metro, condos and single families. That's the highest level of inventory we've seen going back at least 10 years. So there's definitely a correction starting to play out in Nashville. It's definitely starting here in the downtown area where all the condos, where all the apartments are. But now that we're out of that craziness, there's one final thing that I want to talk to you guys about before I sign off in this video. And that is the most important metric to actually look at if you're someone who's trying to find an affordable place to rent, or if you're an apartment investor or landlord trying to find best cities to buy for investment. And that metric is called rent to income ratio. And it basically measures how affordable the rents are relative to the local incomes. So here in downtown Nashville, the rent to income ratio is 37%, meaning people are paying 37% of their gross income on rent. That's really high, that's not very affordable. If you look at Nashville Metro overall, 25.9% is the rent to income ratio. Where does that rank among other cities, large metros? Nashville's right in the middle in terms of rental affordability, which is somewhat problematic because Nashville feels like it should be more affordable. It's not more affordable. But if you actually go to the bottom of this list, rent to income ratio, we can see there's some truly affordable areas to still rent in America. The most affordable market's Des Moines, Iowa. In Des Moines, the rent to income ratio is 18.9%, meaning that locals only need to spend 18.9% of their gross income on their annual rent. One of the most affordable markets in the US. Another really affordable market, surprisingly, is Austin, Texas. In Austin, the rent to income ratio is 20%. One of the cheapest markets to rent in America relative to income is Austin. That, of course, has to do with the fact that rents in Austin have gone down by a lot. Incomes have kept going up. And I think ultimately this rent to income data is going to be really helpful for prospective renters out there and for prospective investors to better understand the market. All things considered, you would rather, as an investor and a renter, be in a more affordable rent to income market. There's more meat on the bone for renters to afford the rents. You can also break this data down by zip code to see the most affordable zip codes in your market. You can access that rent to income data under investor metrics at www.reventure.app under a premium plan. Would highly recommend checking out that data point. It's going to be extremely helpful for you as a prospective investor or renter, figure out what cities that you should be in, what neighborhoods you should be in.